Thanks for joining us today, everyone. Before we get started with our presentation, let me acknowledge that the Florida Humanities is supporting this show. The program you're about to see is supported by the Florida Humanities, the state affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities. Florida Humanities funds and coordinates public humanities programs and publications that explore the people, places, and ideas that shape our state. In addition to this Florida Talk program, the Florida Humanities provides grant funding to cultural institutions, bringing traveling Smithsonian exhibits to rural and underserved communities, and publishes Forum, the award-winning magazine. Private contributions are critical to sustain the programs of the Florida Humanities. For more information on this organization and how to support it, please visit floridahumanities.org. With that, I would like to welcome Julie Hauserman, please. Come on, Julie. Hey.
Hello.
Excellent. Let me give a brief intro on Julie, and then I'm going to pass the virtual microphone over to her and the podium. Julie has been a writer, been writing about Florida's environment and politics for over 3 decades. Actually, I remember a lot of the articles you wrote in the Democrat back in the day.
Way back.
Way back. Her book, Dawn to the Deep, the remarkable underwater exploration of Wes Skiles, won a 2019 National Outdoor Book Award for biography. She's twice submitted entries for a Publisher Prize, once for her stories about pollution in the Florida's Finn Holloway River, which I know well, and once for her stories about the arsenic leaking out of pressure-treated lumbers all over America. She's won the Scrip Howard National Journalism Award's top environmental prize for her work on these arsenic stories. Julie was also a Capitol Bureau reporter for the St. Petersburg Times in Tallahassee and has been a commentator for the National Public Radio's Weekend Edition Sunday and Minnesota Public Radio's The Splendid Table. Her essays are featured in several Florida anthologies, including The Wild Heart of Florida, The Book of the Everglades, and Between Two Rivers. Julie, thank you so much for coming. Everyone is so jazzed about this presentation. And I'm going to allow you to take it from here. Okay, I will stop sharing.
All right. Thank you so much. And I appreciate so much what all that you guys do. Really, it's amazing what I'm going to get my screen here. So.
Yeah, I need to stop sharing. Just give me one. I think I've already done that. Okay, you should be good to go.
Okay. All right. Okay. All right. Are you seeing it?
If you do me one favor and do that display setting we talked about.
All right.
Correct?
You good?
So click that swap presenter and viewer.
I did.
Try it again.
How's that?
Try it one more time. Right now I see that it's the try duplicate slideshow. I don't know why I didn't do it. Folks, we had this all worked out. Guaranteed we practiced. Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Julie, I'll see you on the other side, okay?
Okay. Okay. So I want to thank you so much for having me. And I want to say how much I appreciate the fact that folks are advocating for our springs. And I know from experience how difficult it is. I knew Wes Skiles from High Springs, Florida, through my work as a reporter. I had met him when we were fighting some dairies that were going in around Ginny Springs and High Springs. He was a National Geographic explorer, a cave diver, a photographer, a videographer. He died at age 52 off of the coast of Palm Beach. He was in an open water dive, shooting some film for Nova of groupers, and it's believed that it was equipment failure. He was using a rebreather, which many of the divers in the audience may know, scrubs it's kind of like a self-contained breathing apparatus that you would use on astronauts use them. They scrub your own breath of carbon dioxide, and so you don't have to carry air with you. The official cause of death was drowning, and there was always some question about what had happened, but he was using some borrowed equipment, and he just went to sleep doing what he loved, and was found on the bottom of the ocean. Shortly after, the University Press of Florida approached me about writing his life story. And so I agreed to do it. As it says in the promotion for this talk, he became one of the world's most top photographers in a place with absolutely no light, which is quite a feat. This was prior to digital photography. He began his work prior to all the bells and whistles that we have now that make it possible, GPS, all the things that we have now that make it possible to do this sort of exploration. I'm going to take you through some of his expeditions that he did for National Geographic, Discovery, and other shows that he did. I mean, during his lifetime, he had a great white shark come into his shark cage, that he had to beat it off with his camera. He was buried alive in Australia. He survived getting bit by seals. He punched alligators in the nose to get him away. And these aquanauts are very, very brave people that, hi, Dave Barish, one of my friends from college. These people, these aquanauts, are some of the most little known explorers in the world, and some of the most important, and they go down to tell us things that we need to know, all of us need to know in order to keep our water clean. Most of the aquanauts are extremely secretive. They don't want people knowing where they're going. There's a number of reasons for that. They're where they worry that people are going to get them for trespassing and stuff like that. And they are bringing us knowledge that we would never get any other way. And all you ever hear about from cave divers is when they die. And so people have this fear of it, when we should have this reverence and support for these amazing aquanauts that are going inside of our planet. This picture here is of in Hualta in Mexico, and it shows Wes's wonderful work that he does. This would be a completely black environment, completely dark. And so he's very carefully painting with light here. So he would bring these lights that are floating in the bottom. He has divers below. He's placed all these lights so that you can see what's underneath the cave and on top of it, in the roof of the cave. So it's an amazing way of painting with light and showing people what we need to know to keep our planet clean. This is a famous shot of Wes's. This is at Ginny Springs and High Springs. That's the tannic water that comes from the swamps meeting the spring water. And that's his wife, Terry, as the dive model there. And it just shows the absolute wonder and beauty of our springs. That's the Santa Fe River and Ginny Springs. So those of you who are on this, who know this area. This is Dipolder, this shot was taken 250 feet below the surface of the of the earth. They would enter the water table in like a dark hole that you wouldn't think twice about, near Weeki Wachee. And those of you who are Friends of Wakulla know how important our aquifer is. 90% of the Floridians get their drinking water from aquifers, and just the Floridan aquifer has 36% of the water in all the 5 Great Lakes. So it's one of the most amazing resources on the planet. We haven't treated it the way we should. So I want to talk a little bit about the artistry of this type of documentary filmmaking and still photography. So in order to show this, he had to light inside this diver's mask, have the diver hold a light and put a light behind him so that you can get that experience, that feeling of being in there. And that was really what Wes did that others hadn't done before him, is that he was able to get that sense of movement, sense of danger, sense of excitement. This is the Mole tribe, M-O-L-E. They're a close-knit group of divers, and that's Wes down at the bottom with his camera. They're at the Bahama Blue Holes. You may have heard about the Bahama Blue Holes. It's a incredible cave system that we're learning a lot of information about climate change by taking samples of the stalactites and stalagmites, because like tree rings, they have a record of the climate, and they're teaching us things we need to know. So when I started, this is Wes inside of a hole when he's a young kid. And when I started this project, I assumed that most of the people who did this type of work had to beat down their fear in order to get into these confined areas. And what I found was they were people who actually enjoy that. We called them claustrophiliacs instead of claustrophobics. My friend Brad came up with that. And they were kids who like to make forts or get into cabinets and things like that. They all told me that they feel a sense of calm and envelopment by Mother Earth, that when they're in the caves, they have a sense of flow where they have a complete, entirely focused, because they know that, they have to do everything correct to survive. This is Wes. He's probably about 16, 17 years old here. He was such a gifted diver that at that time, he was hired by the sheriff's departments of North Florida to be a recovery diver. A lot of people died in Ginny Springs and in other springs because they weren't trained properly for cave diving. And if you stir up silt with your flippers, you can't tell which way's up and which way's down. Or maybe you don't know enough to figure out how much air you need. So it's a highly technical profession, and a lot of people didn't know how to do it. And Wes was the person who would go and get those people. He was extraordinarily skilled in the water, and he always remembered directions of the caves. He had an uncanny ability to know where he was in all the tunnels and caves. This is a picture of the Floridan Aquifer and one of the divers going through it. Wes used to call these butt shots. That was really all there was in cave diving videos and photographs before he really started opening up the field artistically by doing a lot of documentary tricks, frankly, in order to have divers swim towards him while he's swimming towards them or past him, just to create that sense of movement and interest in the aquifer and explain to people what's at stake. And you can see there how absolutely clear the water is. This is Sheck Exley. He's probably one of the most well-known cave divers in the world. Wes had the great luck of knowing Sheck and having Sheck be his mentor. And so he was really taught by some of the best in the business. Sheck unfortunately passed away in a very, very deep dive in Mexico. This is the Mole tribe led by Wes, just basically going along and looking for holes to jump into to map the caves. In the early days, they would map the caves using strings where they would tie knots along at certain lengths so that they could, hold those strings and use them to measure the size of the caves and map the caves. And they would do hand-drawn maps of the caves and try to remember everything. They didn't have GPSs. They didn't have digital photography. They didn't have the mappers that they have now. You couldn't really communicate with one another. So it was really some rudimentary exploration, and they all did an amazing job, and we've learned so much about the aquifers because of it. This is what Wes would call an ant farm photo. He really liked this idea because it gives the viewer the idea of what it's like to be between these pieces of bedrock. Of course, Florida's limestone caves are the relics of the bedrock of Africa, of Pangaea, really, before the continents broke apart. They're made of sea creatures. You can see a lot of sea creatures within these. They've seen ancient manatee bones, ancient camels, all kinds of stuff underneath there, including human remains, Mayan remains, just about everything you can imagine that would make its way down. Either had been a cave that had been occupied and later submerged, or things that would make it down through the drainage systems and into the aquifers. As you know, the only way that people really know what's going on in the aquifer is to go in it. We've had groundwater modeling in Florida for many, many years, and I know there's people on this call who are very well versed in the way that you put dye in one spring and wait for it to come out somewhere else, and it's always a surprise. So what Wes and the other aquanauts do is they tell us where the flows are. Then they showed us that there are raging rivers and rivulets that go on underneath that defy what you would think about if you would dump gasoline in. It's not going to go out in a concentric circle, and it's not going to go where you think it's going to go. Florida is still using a flawed groundwater model for all of its permitting, and it's a real shame. And there hasn't really been much movement on changing that. This is another picture from inside the Floridan aquifer. Absolutely beautiful. It's one of Wes's shots here. This is Wes with one of the early cameras. I don't know how early it is, but certainly they're not as big now. They were it was a lot of giant equipment, and a lot of the work was dealing with all this incredible equipment that they had to carry. Some of these expeditions were months and months, involving, you know, dozens and dozens of people, and highly, highly technical, not unlike doing a lunar expedition. This is Wes with some of the early equipment. That's just for one dive. You'd want to have everything redundant, of course. And he rigged a lot of specialty lights, started using aircraft landing lights in order to light up the springs. They made their own housing for cameras so that they wouldn't get drenched or explode in the pressure. And so there was a lot of trial and error that went on, and a lot of experimentation. This is the boil at Ginny Springs, where the water is coming out of the earth. And isn't it just incredibly, incredibly beautiful? I love this shot so much. And I know that a lot of you know that there's a pretty large controversy right now about bottling at Ginny Springs, the newest permit that's available there, and it's headed to court. This is our beloved Walcolla Springs. These are mastodon bones that are in the bottom of the spring. And in the back there, you can see the AquaZep scooter, which enables divers to go farther, faster than they can swimming, so that they can explore tunnels and also stage safety spots, or I don't know what you call them. Somebody of the cave divers probably knows, but little depots where you would stage air and gases in order to go further and make sure that you have enough of these gases to get out if there's any kind of trouble. This is the Devil's Ear or Devil's Eye spring. I can never remember which is which. They're close together on the Santa Fe River. This is an example of Wes's artistry, where he's gone in, he's had divers light inside the spring and put someone in the foreground, in the background there in a canoe, and hit the lighting just right. If you just went by this, it's probably just going to be a dark tannic river surface. So that's really one of his, people really love this photo, and I love it too. You see a lot of things in the springs, and I interviewed more than 50 divers for this book, and I asked them all about things that they'd seen underground and inside the planet. This is Wes's son with a manatee. They see eels. They see there are specialized creatures that live without light, blind crawfish, and there are, like I said, relics of archaeological relics down below that are really quite something. So this is really cool. This is at Walcolla, and I'll tell you a little bit about the Walcolla 1987 expedition. This was a National Geographic expedition to our beloved Walcolla Springs. And of course, to get down, it's a 300-foot deep dive, which is a very deep dive. And this was back in 1987. It was the first use of the mixed gases of heliox, the first use at Walcolla of that, and the first dive tables for heliox, I think, were developed there. And that's a way to keep divers being able to go deep without getting narcosis and, you know, rapture of the deep and getting confused. During this dive, they had, like I said, 20 explorers were involved in it. They made a world record at the time, which was a mile off of the spring where you come into the spring. I think now, and folks can tell me after the talk, is it as long as 5 miles that y'all have gone off of the spring to explore? It's really something else. During this dive, they had a new rebreather. Like I said, it's an equipment that scrubs your own breath. This was an early model that was the size of a small desk that would weigh about 165 pounds. And in order to, use this beast, the head of the expedition, Bill Stone, stayed in Walcolla for 24 hours testing this rebreather. He read books and dozed and listened to music. So they had a problem in planning this dive. So at 2 hours depth at 300 feet, you need about 15, 20 hours of decompression in order to go up in stages so that you don't get the bends, which is a terrible condition that affects divers. And the divers in the audience will know what I'm talking about. So they thought of a lot of different ideas to do this decompression. If you stayed in there that long, the cold waters of Walcolla, you would get hypothermia. So what to do? Put tubes down into the cold spring and fill up the suits with warm water. They thought of all different things. Then they finally decided to build this habitat. And this thing was a bubble filled with pressurized air, and it was anchored to the bottom, and it could be raised and lowered by these giant winches. And the idea was that the divers would do their decompression, and then when they got, at stages from the bottom, and then at 60 feet below the surface, they could get into this suspended habitat, which was filled with oxygen, and they could then do the remaining stops towards the surface in this habitat. The watchmaker Rolex ended up paying for this amazing habitat, and it was made out of the type of rubber that you would use to make military pontoon bridges. They built this thing, it was 12 tons, and they floated it into the spring in pieces. And, about 30 feet down, there's a ledge in Wakulla Spring that they used for the Creature for the Black Lagoon and Airport 77, and that would be the staging area to do the underwater filming. Well, when they started to make this habitat in there, the first thing that happened was they dropped 2 of the ballasts weighing about a ton and a half each, and they rolled off the shelf and they plummeted about 120 feet into the spring. It took, I think I have, let's see. They were able to fish one of them out using an inflatable lift bag the next day. The second had sunk deep into the silt and required 4 days of searching before they found it with a probe rod 30 feet inside the entrance tunnel. When they tried to raise it, the inflatable bag caught on a jagged rock and ripped open, and the ballast plummeted again. So they had to get more bags and more tinkering, and they finally recovered the ballast and went back to assembling the habitat. So the divers went inside the spring to build this habitat. It took 9 tons of lead ballast to keep the habitat stable in the very fast spring flow. And all of us who've swam over the spring will know how fast that is. It's about 6 Toyota Camrys, I think is what I figured out, of weight that they had to add to it. National Geographic sent $20,000 worth of submersible camera gear that Wes was able to use in this expedition. And in the book, I get into all the high wire act, incredible things that happened during that expedition, including scooters going awry and people getting lost and all this kind of stuff. But they ended up, and Wes had to do all these things. They talk about Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire, that she had to do everything that Fred did, only backwards and in heels. He had to do everything that the explorers were doing while filming and doing stills of everyone in a completely inhospitable environment. And so he was one of the best to do this. He was brave, he was skilled. And, this expedition was a real groundbreaker in many ways. Of course, we've moved on to much more sophisticated, including rovers, like the types that they use on Mars and Jupiter and stuff like that they're hoping to. The crazy thing about documentary filmmaking is his article for National Geographic of the still photos was bumped because it turned out that it was the centennial issue and they didn't have room for it. So he was crestfallen. And then the video that he shot became a British TV documentary, and National Geographic bought the rights to it. And it did air in some markets. So you can still find that Wakulla film on the internet, or at least with CDs or in libraries. I'm not sure which. I was provided a lot of the materials, and I can talk more about that later, the process of documenting someone's life, which is a very heavy endeavor, and especially someone who left behind so many films and explored over 500 miles of cave in his lifetime, underwater caves. This is inside the habitat. They could sit around, and they had a tube where they could get seafood sent in from posies, if y'all remember posies. And they had, it was so exciting because they had a long distance telephone that could call anywhere in the world. The park didn't have enough electrical capacity, so they had to put in new poles and lines and transformers in order to run this habitat. They wanted to make sure they didn't have any infrastructure on the sides of the spring because it was a state park. So they had to be very creative on how they pulled this off. Okay, this is a film called Ice Island that Wes did in 2001, and it's an amazing story, and it's an amazing documentary called Ice Island. This was a expedition that went to B-15, which was at the time was the largest iceberg that ever calved off of Antarctica. And it was as big as Connecticut. And Wes decided that they were going to go there for a National Geographic expedition. They had to cross the Southern Ocean, which has waves as high as 6-story buildings, and you know, almost turned the boat over. This was not an icebreaker. It was a smaller boat. It was a smaller research boat, which was perilous in its own way. It's a very, very daring expedition and a very daring film. Some of the first uses of a Sony high-def camera. In this expedition, there's Wes on, he's being lowered in, and there's 2 divers there, which were Jill Heinerth and Paul Heinerth. One of the things that they did was they dove for the first time underneath an iceberg. And now people do this, but it was really the first time. And one thing that they discovered when they got beneath the iceberg was these incredible, beautiful Technicolor gardens, sort of Dr. Seuss gardens is what I like to call them, with glowing creatures and very, very colorful fauna and flora and stuff. And they didn't expect to see such a productive, amazing world down there. The first time they got down into this iceberg, were on the one on the left, they encountered a very, very heavy, heavy current, and which almost sucked them out away from the boat. And they had to put their fingers in the holes made by tiny little ice fish in order to crawl their way along the walls to get out alive from that very, very strong current, which they did not anticipate. This is Wes with no hat, you know, in the frozen temperatures. He did get hypothermia and had to be warmed up after that. But you can see he's not thinking about that. He's thinking about the shot, always thinking about the shot. This is in Walta, which is one of the deepest caves ever explored in the Yucatan. In order to do these types of expeditions, they had to travel miles through the jungle. They had to rig ropes and pulleys and rappel into, you know, a limestone hole. They had to go past raging underground waterfalls like this. They had to go 3/4 miles deep and 2 miles, lay 2 miles of line to bring in equipment for the hole that from the, you know, they were 2 miles in from the hole that they entered in. And they would spend weeks down there eating, you know, food out of tubes and, you know, sleeping in hammocks that were hammered into the rock walls and listening to the roar of these waterfalls. And in 2 miles in was when they would begin their explorations to where the cave system would go. This is one of the, they call this the Mount Everest of interplanetary exploring. It's the deepest, it's the most amazing And there are still teams who are going in it now. During this expedition, they lost one of their members, a Scottish man, and he was a diabetic, and he did not properly prepare bring his medication that he needed when he was doing an exploration. So they had to take his body out and go to the nearest village and call for help. An interesting fact is that years later, I don't know if you remember, there was a bunch of Boy Scouts that were trapped in a cave in Thailand. And one of the rescuers, it turns out, was the son of Ian Rowland, who was killed on this expedition in Walta. So there's a small number of people in the world who do this type of work, and they kind of all know each other, or they know a lot of people know each other. Some people go all over the world just to rescue people who have been lost in caves. And Wes did that, and some of the other divers that he knows have done that as well. This is an incredible story about the Australian outback, but you're just going to have to get the book to find it out. These are great white sharks. When Wes's, the final story they wrote about him in the Washington Post was this incredible story where he went to South Africa for Discovery Channel's Shark Week to shoot a bunch of great white sharks. And he bought a shark cage while he was there in South Africa. And I guess it wasn't that good of a shark cage, because when he went into the water with it, it was charged by a great white, and the great white bent the bars of this cage, and he beat this shark in the nose with his camera. Everybody on the boat thought that he was dead, and they were hysterical. And then he popped up, and sure enough, he had this film of this shark charging this cage, like basically the film of being inside a shark's mouth. So he shot a lot of other film that during that expedition, and when he got home, he found out that he had put the film in the camera backwards, and he didn't have anything. So he had to go back on his own dime, his own time, and reshoot this thing for Discovery so that he would be seen as a stand-up documentarian, and that they would hire him again. People don't realize how difficult this type of work is. A lot of it's on spec. You have to buy this expensive equipment. You have to go and figure your way through all kinds of, airports and transportation with tons of people and expeditions and food and cameras and all that stuff. And especially before digital photography, when you couldn't really see what you had until you developed the film, it was certainly a high wire act. This is Wes. This was one of his favorite things that he did. He was in a series called The New Explorers, and every week they would do some other incredible expedition. And I don't know, older people might remember Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom, and there was always that guy that would go into the Jim, go see the tiger or whatever. Well, Wes was that person in this series. This is actually a submarine. It's called a Newt Suit. So it's got articulated arms, but it's actually a submarine. So you're inside of it and walking on the floor of the ocean. And he wore it in an episode called Walking Among the Sharks, where they went off of Vancouver Island to film 6-gilled sharks, which were kind of elusive and deep sea sharks. And Wes wanted to use this. He loved this thing so much. He wanted to use it to walk between continents. They still use these Newt suits to build underwater tunnels and bridges and cables and all the things that connect us under the water. And I love this smile. He was just a really fun person. And those of you who are on the call who knew him, are going to really love this, this smile as well. He was a really fun, a serious individual, but also a very fun one. This is in the Floridan Aquifer. I think this might be in the cavers in here might know. I think this might be Ginny or somewhere around the Suwannee or the Santa Fe or the Chutney. A great thing about this photo is the beautiful reflection up on the top of the cave. That's from the divers' exhaled breaths. And, Wes really took advantage of that type of painterly approach in showing people what is beneath our feet. you know, so that they don't put a gas station on top of a cathedral, which, as we know in Florida, we've had to fight those types of things because people absolutely have no idea. I want to say that, and you guys are going to understand this very much because you're fighting for Wakulla Springs. Wes when he started to see that things were going wrong with the springs, he did what any person would do. He started to go to his local county commission and they didn't do anything. And then he went to the water management district and they didn't do anything. And then he went to the governor and they didn't do anything. And he tried to do everything in his power in order to get people to understand what was going on with our aquifer. And eventually he decided that the best thing to do was to educate the next generation. And so he did the film that he became kind of famous for called Water's Journey. It was actually a series of 3 films, but the first one is called Water's Journey, Hidden Rivers. And it's an amazing, I write about it in the book, it's an amazing film where they actually track, and Jim Stevenson, who's on this call, is in it. They actually track the divers beneath the ground from atop the ground. So they're walking through a Sonny's barbecue in Alachua, turning left at the salad bar, and their friends are in the aquifer below it. They tracked their friends in the aquifer because their friends were carrying a ferrite rod, and they rigged up a detection meter for ferrite. And so in the film, the cave divers they knock on people's wellheads, they go beneath the golf courses, they go beneath the bowling alley. And the whole purpose of the film was to teach 8th graders, or middle schoolers about what's beneath our feet and to engender a sense of protection. That also works for politicians as well, who just don't know that when they're driving over a hill in High Springs, that it may be in a giant room. Under Walcolla, y'all know this probably, there's a room big enough to park a 747 in. So we're talking about cathedrals that are so impressive and so vital to our living on this planet. Wes also was on the Florida Springs Task Force, which Jim Stevenson worked on and helped create under Governor Bush. And he did care so much, it did frustrate him. And I think one line that I have in the book is that, it was hard to see which was more daunting, the depths of a gnarly cave system or the politics in Tallahassee. He was frustrated with it a lot, as we all are, but he kept going because he knew what the stakes were. This is Wes in filming the Water's Journey 2, which was in the Everglades. I don't know if it's 2 or 3, but there's one in the St. Johns River and one in the Everglades. They're all on online. The DEP was part of the funder for it, so you can see these films. I really like Water's Journey, Hidden Rivers, the first one, a lot because it's a little bit humorous. In the St. John's one, they get in a boat that turns into a helicopter, and so they fly over the St. John's, and that's pretty cool too. His technical skill and the things that he could afford got better and better, as he got more successful. This is one of my favorite pictures. This is Cypress Springs, which is in the Western Panhandle. Absolutely beautiful, beautiful place. This is them inside the aquifer, swimming through your drinking water. This is the Bahama Blue Holes, truly, truly amazing cave systems that you would just never see. This is one of Wes's most famous photographs, and it hangs, it's one of the top 10 National Geographic photographs of all time, and it hangs in the photo department of the photo department in National Geographic in Washington. This is what's called a Stitcher photograph. It's not exactly Photoshopped, but it is, kind of. It is a series of photos stitched together in order to make a panorama. This is a highly complex photograph. He's hidden divers with lights at various points during this. He's precisely put where the people are swimming through it to give you the sense of scale. He's put he's made it dark above and below in order for you to get this idea of what it's like to be inside there. This is a photograph that took months to put together, and numerous people and numerous tries. He would draw these pictures out, and so that everyone knew what they were supposed to do. by this point, this was his last assignment for National Geographic, and he finally ended up on the cover. He died before the issue came out, but he did see the mock-up of it. It's the holy grail to get the cover of National Geographic, but he did get a pullout, which is, the page pullout. And he did see that this photograph was going to be there. Really just a stunning, stunning piece of work right there. And the National Geographic editors I interviewed, they still marvel at how he was able to pull this photograph off. This is Wes near the end of his life at the Bahamas shoot. And you can see there now he's got lots more equipment, lots more fancy toys. He's at the top of his profession for sure. He's doing well, he's healthy. He's doing what he loves. There's a park named after Wes at Peacock Springs. Those of you who are from this area, it's just a bit east of us. One cool thing about this park is that as you walk the trails, it tells you what's underneath your feet. One of my favorite anecdotes about Peacock Springs is the one where the divers were swimming in there and they thought there was an earthquake. And then they just realized that it was a train going above them. Something you don't really think about. This is the last slide, and because I want to have time for questions. This is Ginny Springs, at dawn. And I know that all of you are working so hard to protect Walcolla and all the other springs, all the other folks that are springs advocates, and how difficult it is because of the complex land planning and permitting systems that are happening around our springs, and all the things that the pumping and all the things that are affecting them. But I just want to say that all we can do is all we can do, and we have to keep doing it. And I know that you know that, and I appreciate so much all the things that you do to keep our aquifer clean. And I know that Wes, if you were still with us, would be still doing it. So I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to me tonight. And I'm ready if anybody has any questions, I'm ready for those.
Julie, first, that was absolutely amazing. Absolutely amazing. Audience members, there's a Q&A, and I should have mentioned it on the front end, but I see folks are already finding the Q&A. Please post questions, and I'm going to go ahead and just start reading some that have already come in. Let's see. First question is, how has the latest technology and rebreather modified the team approach to exploration? Do you have any idea when you spoke to cave divers on that?
I do not know the answer to that. And I would defer to those that are on the front lines with these rebreathers. They're quirky, computer-driven pieces of equipment that are amazing and really enable people to go further. But Wes's friends believe that that's a malfunction of a rebreather was what killed him.
Really? Yeah. Where in Florida is the deepest, most technically challenging dive, and which one has been most unexplored location? Do you know?
Well, I'm not a cave diver, but I've heard a lot of people talk about Dive Boulder. I'm your friendly journalist from above. I don't go inside the.
Well, I'll rephrase the question. I will rephrase it for Wes, from the folks that you interviewed with Wes. What was one of his most technically challenging dives?
Definitely Walta in Yucatan.
There you go.
Yeah, that was definitely the most. I mean, that chapter is absolutely hair raising for sure. It's funny because everyone asks me like these two questions. They always want to tell me, I would never do that. They just feel like they need to tell me that. And if I was writing about astronauts, they wouldn't say I would never go to the moon, but they just feel like they want to tell me how freaked out they are about people going in there. And it's so funny. And then they'll always say, is he the one who died? Because all they ever hear about is a cave diver who died.
Cave diver who died.
They don't hear about the scientific exploration aspect of it and the heroism of it.
Yeah, I mean, when you mention the comparison to the moon, I mean, basically they are tapping the unexplored areas on our blue planet that we as terrestrial creatures can't reach. Not without.
Yes,
really.
And some of the most advanced exploration in interplanetary exploration that's going on in the world today is at Walcolla.
I like it. All right, well, looking ahead 25 years, what will be the most important find to help conservation efforts for aquifer and groundwater protection in Florida? Well, that's right up your alley. What do you think, based on your?
I feel that forcing the state to have accurate groundwater modeling that's based on real world information from the explorers and not on some kind of formula that they come up with based on core samples, I think that would be number one. And then holding people who want permits accountable to these more accurate models. The problem is we just chase science through the courts. You know, they say, oh, you don't know if it's going to do that. And then that's enough to get the permit. You know, we
Policymakers need to, you're saying policymakers need to trust the scientists.
We need to develop an accurate groundwater model, and policymakers we need to develop permitting based on that. The permitting is too permissive. It's not based on the real world of Florida.
Well, someone would like to know how you got access to all this amazing information on Wes.
Okay, well, that's a great question. The first thing is, it's really hard to write somebody's life story. I mean, I didn't really realize the weight of it when I took the project on. You know, what do you leave in? What do you take out? What do you leave out? What would someone say about you? What, you know, and I was just paralyzed by this great responsibility. And then I didn't really know how was I going to organize it and all this type of stuff. Well, Wes's family and his friends, it took a little bit, but they did trust me very much. And Terry, his wife, was very integral to this project. And she gave me access to Wes's office, which was still just as he had left it, and all of his films, and everyone helped and worked with, you know, he left so much material. This is the other part about it was, it's really not a book, it's a film. You know, I was thinking, what could I do in words to honor someone who left this legacy of film that's absolutely amazing, of all these springs before they got green and filled with, and I hope it will become a film. I really do. So I got through a large part of the interviewing processes, and I interviewed numerous people on every expedition because everyone remembers differently. And then Terry, his wife, said, oh, you might want these dive journals. And I said, what? And all of his dive journals from the 70s on were sitting in a stack in his office.
Wow.
I thought, what am I going to do with these? So I sat there and I read them into a tape recorder, and I paid somebody out of my own pocket to transcribe all of his journals. So to make them digital, you know, just the excerpts, you know, that I picked. And it was great because I was able to give that to the family and, you know, make it available to his kids. His daughter, Tessa, is an amazing Springs photographer and is carrying on some of that work, which is really neat. So what I ended up doing was interviewing everybody on the expeditions, going from film to film to film, and then dividing it up that way, making a big, long timeline. It took me many years because I had a regular job. I mean, you don't get paid for a University Press of Florida book. You don't make money off of that. It's a more of an academic press. So it was really kind of I'm lucky that I worked for environmental groups during that time, and I was a consultant for many environmental groups doing other work on other environmental issues. So I was able to do this on the weekends and maybe take a 3-day weekend and travel. And it was close by to my house too. So I didn't have to do a lot of travel.
Huh, wow. Wow. It sounds like it was a huge endeavor. And the point that you made, that how do you compress someone's life in a book like that?
Yeah, and it's exciting. I mean, there was too much, you know, it was so exciting. It was so exciting. There was just a million things. And I kept going on all these rabbit holes, you know, like then I would learn about, oh my gosh, the bedrock and the creatures. And I didn't know any of that stuff either. So it was hard to rein myself in. But it was really Wes's family and friends who trusted me and helped me.
Neat.
Like ground truth, everything with them.
Wow. Now, someone has said here, it never occurred to me the similarities in the glacier dives with aquifer diving. Aside from the temperatures and currents, did they make any other additional comparisons between those type of dives?
Maybe technically in terms of inhospitable conditions. I would say the wildest thing about that was that people went crazy on that boat. You don't think about that.
I mean, like
you're on a
crazy,
boat.
crazy.
Yeah, I mean, the cook barricaded herself in, and people got mad at each other and got paranoid. You're freezing. The ice started going around the boat. The film is great, and you can see it, I think, on YouTube. Bill Curtis, who's a famous announcer, he does A&E and Wait, Don't Tell Me stuff. He was a big help with this book. He was a big supporter of Wes's and a friend of Wes's. Also, the Grateful Dead, which I'm a big fan, the drummer Billy Kreutzmann, I interviewed him for this because he was a friend of Wes and did some films with Wes, especially in the Baja region. And so I would say that the Arctic stuff, they discovered for the first time the biological productivity of icebergs, which is now a major source of study.
Oh, it is. It is. And the hanging onto the holes that the fish made so they didn't get swept away.
They were little tiny holes. They were
unnerving.
pulling themselves along with this, and he's trying to hold on to that camera.
Yeah.
Everybody was afraid he wouldn't let the camera go, and he would get, he would drown because he wouldn't let that camera go. But yeah, and I mean, Wes would do stuff like tell everybody to get off the boat and get out on the ice and play football. He was always the cheerleader. The helicopter froze up and they couldn't use the wheel. I mean, it was just a million things that happened. Your tears freeze.
Yeah.
How do you do an expedition in that environment? Jill Heinerth, who has her own amazing book about being a cave diver. She was on that expedition and she was a big help to me in breaking down what happened during it.
Wow. Wow. Here's a question for you. What is the biggest threat to the Florida aquifer in 2021? And if you were to project a decade out in 2030?
The biggest threat to Florida's aquifer is nutrient pollution from manure and septic and fertilizer. No doubt about it. There may be people on this call who know about this, but we can age the water in the aquifer. And they do so by using radioactive isotopes from the atomic bomb blasts and chlorofluorocarbons from refrigerants that went into the atmosphere and dropped down onto Earth and are still present in the water. So by using those markers, they can tell how old the water is coming out of the springs. And what we find is that the agricultural pollution decades ago that we put in the aquifer is coming out of the springs, that the springs are pumping out nitrogen, not just receiving it. That's old ag pollution. Our laws on agriculture are incredibly permissive, ridiculously so. Ag is essentially exempt from the Clean Water Act, so you can't hold them to anything. Now they have all this right to farm legislation, which they're expanding this year, that says you can't have standing. The owners of Ginny Springs, everyone is very upset about the bottling, the prospect of increasing their bottling, which is also ridiculous, this pumping, because they're not giving us anything for it. They're not even taxing the bottled water. But the owners of Ginny Springs have fought for decades, spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to try to beat back the ridiculous agricultural despoiling that's happening around that spring. A Canadian company came in and just land applied a bunch of fertilizer into the sand there. And within 6 months, the deer spring at Ginny Springs came up bright green. Ginny sued and they didn't have standing. That's what the court determined. And we have filed a lot. I work for Earth Justice now, a nonprofit environmental law firm, and we represent groups on the ground for free. And what we found is that it's very, very difficult to win any of these springs cases. We won a major Supreme Court case about Hawaii, and surprising, the Trump court gave one of the greatest water pollution rulings we've ever gotten. And it was Maui, Hawaii, that the water in the aquifer was subject to the Clean Water Act, that the underground, not just the surface water, the underground water. I think that the ripples of that decision could really start to ripple out for our other cases as things move through the system. But in the
precedent is
never won anything.
Mm-hmm. So what is the biggest hope for the Florida aquifer system?
I would say people advocating for it, people telling its stories, people realizing what's at risk here, more and more awareness and play and art. There's a lot of artists are working on springs and showing the springs. And people don't know about it. They think Florida's beaches. They don't know that we have one of the largest stores of fresh water on the planet and over 1,000 springs.
Someone would like to know if any of Wes's movies are available through streaming services.
You know, I think on YouTube is where I found most of them. I haven't seen any on streaming services. And you know, when we did this book, it's the state press. So there wasn't like a lot. It's not like a commercial publisher that can do a lot. But I had envisioned, let's do a website that has all these films on it. But you know, they just don't have, you know, they just don't have funds to do all that stuff.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember the first time you met Wes?
Yeah, I sure do. We were fighting a giant, the Watkins Dairy, and Jim Stevenson, if you're on this call, you'll remember, it was a huge confined animal feeding operation in High Springs. And he contacted me, and the owner of Ginny Springs, Bobby Ray, contacted me, and I was at the St. Petersburg Times, and they wanted me to write about it. And the thing is, papers like local, and there's no local there. The Gainesville Sun was it. So to have a journalist for a large newspaper come in and write about it was a real change. And it took them a long time to get me to get there. But once I did, I was really hooked on finding out. Springs advocates came to me when I was at the Tallahassee Democrat and showed me films that were done at Bird Sink in Jefferson County and showed me what was beneath. And I had no idea, of course. And the more we educate media and other people who are in a position to tell other people, the better off we're going to be. Because I
Great advice.
And I was the environment writer. I had Mike.
So is there a map of
Mike Weisenbaker, if you're on here, if people know him, he was a person who really educated me quite a bit and drove me around and showed me all the springs and the swallowets. Jim Stevenson, those people are angels to our water.
Is there a map that overlays city maps to help us understand the aquifer and where it is in relation to the terrestrial to above ground?
That would be an excellent thing to have.
That's a no. Not readily available yet. Okay.
I don't know. I mean, you could ask Harley Means at the USGS. You could ask, that's Bruce Means' son. You could ask the Water Management District. They may have all those things. I will tell you a quick story before we go. Wes went through all these places, and this story's in the book, and he made a huge map of the areas of the Santa Fe, Ichetucknee, Suwannee. He put arrows everywhere showing where the water went in real time, and they weren't interested in it.
Wow.
It's in his office. It's a treasure.
Wow. Can you speak a little about the flawed groundwater methodology that the state is currently using?
Yes, it's based on sandy soils like out in the Midwest, where you would drop a pan of oil and it would go out in concentric circles, where our water doesn't do anything like that. It shoots through holes and tunnels and, you know, all over the place. It might take 5-6 days. It might take 3 weeks to get from one place to another. Yet we're using this model that absolutely, and these companies are just, you know, they know it. They just rubber stamp it. You can just use the same model. And it's not accurate at all it's for the Walcolla aquifer out in Nebraska, I think.
There's a question here
the person who's done the best work on exposing that is Craig Pittman, who we used to be with the Tampa Bay Times. He did a lot of work on what was wrong with that model, and I relied on his reporting.
Question about Wes and his favorite cave dive. Do you happen to know what it was?
I don't think he could say one. And if he did, he wouldn't say, he probably wouldn't say.
Was it difficult for him to get permission to dive in the springs?
These guys did not, in the early days, they did not get permission. They rode around, they went to little bars and asked locals where there was places. They call it cave booty. There's a whole section in my book about the good old days of cave diving, and they'd follow each other down dirt roads to try to find out where the other groups were going. And the idea was that you wanted to be the first one in a place. And that's how we got all this knowledge, was because they were interested in the sporting aspect of it and the daredevil aspect of it. The whole trespassing thing is a big deal. because now everybody's afraid of insurance and this and that. So if people are trespassing, they're certainly not letting anybody know. And I will say that it was very difficult for me to get the cave divers to trust me, because they're not accustomed to talking to people. Wes was really one of the first people who went down in there and came up and told us what was going on. And he did it at great personal risk.
Wow. Well, you know, we have reached our 8 o'clock. We're leaving questions on the floor. I want to thank you. Thank you very much. And I'm sorry we couldn't get to all the questions, folks. One person did ask, can they reach out to you via email if they have questions that they would like to ask?
Sure. I've got a website, juliehauserman.com. And I think if you send an email there, it will get to me.
Excellent.
It's a very old website, and I apologize. It's very old.
I'm not going to fuss about that at all.
It's not updated. It's just, yeah.
Yeah. Well, in closing, you know, folks, thank you for joining us. And Julie, thanks for the wonderful presentation. I've learned so much about Wes and the aquanauts. And listen, members of the audience, you can pick up Julie's book at Midtown Readers, who is partnering with the Friends in the spring series. So please go on down there, support local and support the authors. Also, I look forward to seeing you guys in April. We have on Earth Day, Peggy McDonald will be presenting Marjorie Harris Carr, Defender of the Florida Environment.
Oh, I loved her. Marjorie Carr. I did a profile of her for the St. Pete Times.
Did you really? How fun. Hey, once again, everyone, please consider joining the Friends or donating to the Friends, and do go and pick up Julie's book. Good night and stay safe.
Thanks so much, y'all. Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.